Travis Wingoodsell. I've got a little over an hour before our cartoon president, which may be the last. Stephen Colbert had a little segment on his show that I saw on YouTube of our cartoon president. So it was awesome. So I thought I'd do a video on Babylon, oh Babylon, Babylon. I saw that people like the one where I showed the picture of my little Liz, but more people have had an immediate interest in the Ezekiel one. But yeah, I don't know why people are so afraid of socialism. Canada gives out the cutest little babies just for free. Here's a baby, here's a baby. So cute. Yeah, nobody actually practices socialism. Canada doesn't even practice socialism. I'll tell you a little secret. They just adjust the money around. They're exactly like us. And they just adjust the money so that the poor get better taken care of than our poor do. So, Babylon. Everybody wrongly assumes that that's the place where Abraham came from. In southeastern Iraq. Down there by the can't remember the name of the sea in that specific area, but the river Tigris and Euphrates exit into the sea that exits into the Indian Ocean, and it's blocked off with a mountainous wall between Iraq and Iran. And so there's a lot of earthquakes right there on that fault line. But down in Ur of Babylon, it was marsh until not too long ago when Saddam Hussein drained the marshes. And it began, we don't know exactly the origin of humans in Babylon, but the first identification of humans there were just swamp dwellers, just living there in the swamps. When Assyria took over in the 700 BCEs, that's when migrations away from Assyria began, and thus gave rise to Babylon, that grew and grew and grew until eventually they took over Assyria, and then came into Jerusalem, to Judah, to conquer and make them tributaries first, and then conquered them and took them captive into Babylon, where a garrison, or a holding cell, a city building location, I don't know what you call it, a prison for Jews from Jerusalem was made just for them. And that's where they inhabited during their captivity time. And so the origins of the name, you must understand, are different if it's Paleo-Hebrew versus Semitic Hebrew, also known and identified as Aramaic. And so I'll have to review this video, so that gives me incentive to be quicker, as I will show captions in the ancient languages for you to help illustrate what I'm talking about. The first alphabet was Phoenician. Now, I know there are those of you who think you are smart and that you've heard that it's Proto-Sinaitic. That is incorrect. Proto-Sinaitic is Semitic. It is not the origin of the alphabet. The Greeks, who were sea travelers, sea people even, were the ones who developed the alphabet. And it's originally called Phoenician. And Paleo-Hebrew is Phoenician. That's what I refer to it as. Because once the Jews from Babylon were taken to Babylon, that's when Paleo-Hebrew was transformed into Semitic Hebrew. But before this came Aramaic. And Aramaic was a Semitic version of Phoenician. Assyria wanted their own alphabet as well, because it was working so well and was very popular with these Greek Phoenician sea merchants to do trade and such, and decided to pick it up themselves. And for your information, as you've assumed that Proto-Sinaitic is the origin of the alphabet, you are now getting original, exclusive material that you will not hear from any other scholar in the world. This is because I'm the one who deciphered Paleo-Hebrew. And this is the results of my deciphering Paleo-Hebrew, is that there are a number of things that naturally fit into place now to explain the origins of things. And so Phoenician then split. The Greeks decided to create their own split version called Paleo-Greek. And Paleo-Greek had extra letters, and they used vowels for the first time ever in an alphabetical language. Whereas Phoenician, Paleo-Hebrew, and even Aramaic and Semitic Hebrew still kept a full consonantal language. And so there does seem to be a cutting off of trade with the Greeks and Assyria and Babylon as a result of that. But if you're familiar with Coptic, if you've taken John Gee's class on Coptic at BYU, that's a much later version after the regular Greek that dropped the extra letters but still kept the vowel letters and turned omega into the final letter of their alphabet. It's during this Greek time that they organized the alphabet into an ordered system. And so original alphabet was not in an ordered system. Having made the decipherment of Paleo-Hebrew, I tried to see if there was a story being told, sort of, but it comes from the Greek period, as I have learned, when they organized the alphabet. And so Semitic, Aramaic, Greek all harmonized themselves into their alphabets then. And this is why the Yod, if you refer to Psalms 119, or I'm hoping I will show it at the bottom of the screen that I don't miss this, in Paleo-Hebrew is the same pictorial script or letter, character of the Zeta in Greek. And that's why I was able to make the discovery that the Hebrew god Yah and the Greek god Zeus are spelled exactly the same in script form. Obviously not phonetically. And this is part of that reason, is that when Greek changed and they all got together to harmonize a structured alphabetical system, to give it names and all that, that's when things got mixed up and confused, and information was lost and into the annals of history. And so original Paleo-Hebrew is not the same phonetics as Semitic Hebrew or Aramaic. And that's why I would recommend, though I still haven't finished the vocabulary test yet, but the preliminary research that I've done shows that the same character spellings are derived with the same origin meaning. And the reason why is because of the characters from Egyptian that they're taken from. And they're different than the Proto-Sinaitic characters. That's how I was able to decipher Paleo-Hebrew. Is sticking to Proto-Sinaitic, I couldn't figure it out. It just doesn't work. And when I did the actual research, I found that Proto-Sinaitic just fails miserably to explain Paleo-Hebrew. I did a whole paper on the number of problems with William Foxwell Albright's theory. And I realized I needed to start from scratch and do pioneer research in the field to make a decipherment. The reason why I went into Paleo-Hebrew was Joseph Smith from the King Follett Discourse. He claimed that Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 was translated incorrectly from the biblical Hebrew text. The biblical Hebrew text did not begin until around 800 CE and continued for a couple hundred years, while several groups of Masorite Jews, scholars, were working on this project. And that's why it's an Aramaic script, because the Samaritans, of whom they loathe, as is still recorded in the biblical text, was continuing to use the Paleo-Hebrew script. And so despite what Deuteronomy orders all Jews to not change one jot nor tittle, iota and tittle, they nonetheless changed the script and added vowel points. And depending on the Jewish school of Masoretes, determines their grammatical termination and the vowels that are used for the particular word. So there's an inconsistency throughout the Hebrew Bible. We do, however, have confirmation that the Masoretic text is the most accurate, because Emmanuel Tov is the one who did a criticism of the Hebrew Bible, Masoretic text, when the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. And he goes over in great detail. Excellent book to get it. He was Mormon until the church said that his denial of the house of the Lord shall be built in the tops of the mountains was not referring to Utah. And so he's no longer a Mormon. But a brilliant scholar and a great loss to the church, who don't care about translation anyway, and tend to chase out those of us who are translators, intent on destroying our lives. And so my decipherment is that each letter of the alphabet represents a character or a combo glyph characters from Egyptian, and that those characters contain vocabulary meaning at multiple levels. And so it's a very complex system, which when the Greeks introduced phonemes, it sort of detracted away from the original meanings and turned each word into one and only one meaning. And so deciphering Paleo-Hebrew and thus Paleo-Greek helps me see the fuller meaning of each vocabulary word and even a single letter. Paleo-Hebrew is composed of 2 letters, not 3 in Semitic, 2. And the first letter is what's called a determinative. A determinative is a single character that represents an adjective to describe the 2-letter word. And so, for example, you have the word for tree. Well, what kind of tree are you talking about? That's where you utilize among the 22 characters in the script to specify the type of tree that you're referring to. So you can sort of see a problem when you start to develop more species of trees, or you expand beyond your environment to discover new types of trees, making it more difficult to explain and communicate the new trees that go beyond the letters of the alphabet. And so in that sense it fails, but for the time period in the location, it was a monumental achievement. And so as the word for Babel, as we see in the biblical text, they claim that Nimrod who is a direct descendant, the birthright blessing son, even, I think, of Ham, decides to up and leave his birthright blessing inheritance, as he is to be the king of Egypt, and decides to go into Assyria, and there found his own kingdom. Why? You've got Egypt. It's yours. So there's something going wrong in the biblical text, as he supposedly then founds Babel, which is not in Assyria. It's further down the rivers and was not in existence at the particular time period referred to in the biblical text. And so Joseph Smith, you'll notice, in facsimile number 1, figure number 10. Pay attention. Go into the story now. Chapter 1. Where did that scene, that facsimile, take place? In order for that to be Abraham on the altar being sacrificed, and then the angel of the Lord and the Lord's presence appear. Yes, there were 2 that appeared. We only show the one, except for scholars who have identified that the fingers are not actually fingers, they're feathers from the second person who shows up. And that also gives us a clue as to how the remainder of the facsimile and the papyra of Abraham is to be translated. We don't have facsimile 3 translated. Did you know that? And as a result, Egyptologists have no clue, because again, they only know Egyptian because of the Rosetta Stone, which was Greek, not Paleo-Greek, and trying to make a phonetic system out of ancient Egyptian and the Demotic script of Egyptian. And so it's the language of the Egyptians and the learning of the Greeks. Does that sound familiar? Just replace Greeks with Jews. And so I've recognized that though Paleo-Hebrew and Paleo-Greek share the same vocabulary, with the exception of Paleo-Greek's additional letters, Aramaic and Semitic Hebrew are different. That they do actually correspond more to Proto-Sinaitic characters, at least for the phonetic portion of it. They tried to force the Paleo-Hebrew script to the phonetic name meaning in Semitic, and it just doesn't work, but that's what they tried to do. So there is different meanings if you're trying to figure out the meaning for Babylon. And so you got to think in terms of Semitic, because that's when Babylon came about, was after Semitic alphabet came about. And so you can't really apply Paleo-Hebrew to it, because it would be a completely different meaning. But for Babel, which is Lebanon, that would be the correct meaning, would be the Paleo-Hebrew meaning, rather than Babylon, which is the Semitic meaning. Another thing of interest with Babylon is that the N ending is a determinative. It's a special one that helps distinguish between a person, a king specifically, or a kingdom. The words often involve the names of a person and place, as well as an action, a verb, as well as even a noun meaning, a regular noun meaning. And so in order to distinguish whether it's a king or a kingdom, they use the N at the end. And so if you're talking in the context about going to Babylon and meeting the king of Babylon, you would have it understood in the way it was used. So Babylon said such and such, I will smite thee if you do not worship Bel. And so you understand that Babel is the name of the king. Solomon, for example, it's King Salem, King of Peace, not Solomon. And so if such a person was king of Babylon, he would be King Babel, would be his actual name. And Babylon is the kingdom of Babylon, Babel. But it's not to be confused with the original Babel, with the tower. And notice in the Book of Mormon that Bruce R. McConkie is the only one who makes that mistaken connection. Shame on you, Bruce. Because the text never says that it's Babylon, where the tower comes from. It just says the Great Tower. And it's Bruce who puts in the Tower of Babel in the chapter heading. And so yes, I know about that because I was involved on the revised project for the footnotes for the foreign language editions. So that's how I know all that stuff. So let's give you the meanings. The B, so I'm hoping that I put it down here below. The B script in Paleo-Hebrew is a person with their hand up to their mouth. So it's any kind of action that involves the mouth of a person. So eating, speaking, that kind of thing. The J stroke is the indicator that it's a person. And then the triangle is the arm up at the mouth. Whereas in Aramaic, it is a house. It's a blueprint of a house, just a rough, simple house structure with an entrance and then one room. And so already you can see the difference between Babel and Babylon in the meaning. So if you remember, Babel is called Babel because of the confusion of the languages. Confusion of the language, communication. See how that works? And whereas Babel, for Babylon, Kingdom of Babel, it's the house, determinative, for Bel, the god Bel of Babylon, House of Bel, which is temple. And so that's the home place of Bel. And so the apocryphal story of Bel, and they always throw in and the dragon. They're two separate stories. Uh, that's where that comes from. It's talking about Bel, who's in the temple at Babylon during Daniel's time period, during the captivity, and are having an investigation as to who ate the food. And found out the priests were playing a con on the king of Babylon. And so that's an awesome story, my favorite. And so the Jews should have caught on to this, as typically names are defined in the biblical text when the Jew who wrote it, and the oldest we can find is the Dead Sea Scrolls, defined it. So that's why I pick on Russell M. Nelson, because, oh dear God, how did he fail so miserably? Oh, he went to Hebrew scholars. Oh dear God. I mean, he does say one of the meanings, but he chose the wrong one. The obvious one was right in line with the theme of his talk. And so why he chose the other one to then create a connection to his talk, just so humiliating. And if you understand more about that, and if you've heard the other videos I've done on it, you'll understand why he, of all people, to have screwed that up, is why it's so humiliating for him. Just go to the passage in, I think it's section 124, where it says the office of Moses is the first president of the church to be a seer, a revelator, translator, prophet. Yeah, oh man, he blew that one. So, anyway, that's how the definitions, the meanings of Babel differ depending on whether it's Lebanon with Paleo-Hebrew versus Ur of Babylon in Iraq, the house of Bel. The El is the upraised arm. It works in both, it looks like. Though in Paleo-Hebrew, it's a reversed J. And so it does seem to still correspond with covenant making, with the raising of your arm, your right arm. Because the word for the word, the right hand, right side, corresponds with that concept of covenant making in the biblical text. And in Aramaic script, it's more bricked off, like a lightning bolt almost, but still in the sense of an arm. Babylon was a theocratic religion, as all religions were. They were religion and government combined into one, theocracy. And they had tributaries. So Egypt was the original tributary of Jerusalem until Babylon took over. And then Babylon became the tributary, or the tribute. They became a tributary to Babylon. In other words, they had to give taxes in the form of goods, produce and food and slaves and animals or whatever was needed by Babylon according to the taxes. And the reason why Babylon came back 11 years later and destroyed the place was because they weren't giving tribute. Naughty, naughty. That's how the system worked, is that they built their capital and the system of economy that they used required outside townships to supply the needs of the capital so that they can do the business of governance and religious worship and all that stuff, because they don't have the ability to do those and farming and agriculture and horticulture and all that at the same time. And so they do tribute rather than having people assigned to those tasks, or people who take it upon themselves to be industrious, to start a field and sell their goods at the market. But that's where that came from when all hell started breaking loose as kingdom after kingdom were conquering, is that you get independent, innovative people who say, hey, well, I can be a farmer and sell my goods at a marketplace and make some money off of that. So at the time when Jesus' Gospels narrative talks about taking money and investing it, the parable of the prodigal son, for example, or the parable of the talents that the church used as their excuse for why they're not helping us during a viral pandemic. They're waiting for Jesus to come. See, here's your money. Good job. Here's your money back. And then Jesus gives it back and says, go and make some more. Okay. Yeah, I totally screwed up the interpretation of that parable. And so when the scriptures talk about Babylon in Doctrine and Covenants section 1 verse 16, it says Babylon's going to fall. Well, the reason why it's going to fall is because it's not Babylon, which already fell. It's a code word used by the Smiths to indicate another location. In the 1981 version of the triple combination, that's the first time when the footnotes were developed, they tried to decode as much as they could from the Doctrine and Covenants, because they knew that the Doctrine and Covenants was encoded, but they didn't think to say, well, if the Doctrine and Covenants is encoded, maybe the Book of Mormon is encoded. No, they got to claim that the Book of Mormon is real history. So no, they completely missed chapter 1 of 1 Nephi that talks about seeing the sign of the Son of Man in a dream in the heavens in the first year that Babylon puts a puppet king on the throne of Jerusalem. So yes, they completely missed that the sign of the Son of Man occurred on the 23rd of September 2017. If Lehi is seeing the 23rd of September 2017 sign in the heavens, and he sees and says that that's when Babylon put a king on the throne, and then you go to the almost right there in 3rd Nephi, and you hear that the signs had occurred 23rd September 2017, and then 4 years later they anoint this king as king, doing away with the rule of the judges and the Constitution, the law of Mosiah. 4 years later, and everybody's missed it, except for me, who's the one who's discovered the code in the Book of Mormon. So, when they're talking about Babylon in section 1 of the Doctrine and Covenants, you need to look at the context, because Babylon is a theocracy. We don't have a theocracy in America. We have a government, and then religion is separate under the First Amendment. So we have to then figure out which, now that we've established where the total solar eclipse occurred, the first day of darkness, the last day of darkness of the third day, crosses in America. Therefore, America is the prophesied land for all of Scripture. So it's not Egypt, it's not Jerusalem, it's America. This is how we identify this. And they're using the concept of the historical Babylon to teach us what is going to take place right now, as we've just witnessed it. We just witnessed the fulfillment of the tribes of the Nephites who are divided, uniting in their hatred towards Jacob and the kingmen, refusing to have him as king. We just had that fulfilled. Do you understand? And so there's the song Ye Elders of Israel, and where it says, O Babylon, we bid thee farewell. We're going to the mountains of Ephraim to dwell. And obviously, because the composer composed it after already settling in Utah, what was now the territory of Utah at the time. And so he's saying this valley with the mountains on either side, with our snow today and into tonight, has to do with Ephraim, the mountains of Ephraim. And that's why Emmanuel Tov is so disagreeable with the church in thinking that this is the top of the mountains as prophesied by Isaiah. But Hinckley shut him up by building the conference center, as everybody therefore assumed, with the 2002 Olympics on top of it, that sure enough, this is Zion. And so Babylon in that hymn is America. And sure enough, the Statue of Liberty was designed after Ishtar of Babylon. And if you're wanting to know more about Ishtar, you can go to the book of Esther. It's her book. Esther and Ishtar are one and the same. It's just the phonemes are different. The vocabulary. And so it's the book of Ishtar. And so again, it's not a real history. There was no Queen Esther of the Jews to save the Jews. It's just a story told later on. And so when looking in chapter 1 or section 1 of the Doctrine and Covenants, you look at the context and you realize that he's talking, Joseph is talking about the religious part of Babylon. So then you have to say, okay, well, who is the religion? Because we know about the great and abominable church, which is also going to fall like Babylon, and thus is connected to Babylon, the whore of all the earth. They're one and the same. And that's where you got to go to the Book of Mormon to look at the characteristics of this abominable church. And then you look at Temple Square and the signs and you go, oh crap, I was born and raised into it? Oh, crap. So yes, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the religion of Babylon. And it is going to fall. Some other characteristics that are not readily understood is that Jews are considered Semites. It's because they got assimilated into Babylon, and they carried it with them back into Jerusalem. And that's a naughty no-no, according to the Torah and Daniel. But the calendar system, the language, their holy days, all assimilated into Babylon. So the number 7, for example, the 7th day as a day of rest from Babylon. It was a superstitious holiday, a holy day. They took the day off because they didn't want to do any work because they were afraid they would get cursed. And that's where idolatry originated from, was from Babylon. And so, yeah, why are we just worshiping God only once a week? It's because of that assimilation into Christianity that the church did. And also Sidney Rigdon, who wanted at least once a week for worship and giving sermons as part of his deal for the Book of Mormon. So there you go. There's the thing on Babylon.